The dust storm rolled over the town of Copper Creek like a vengeful spirit, pelting Harper James's face with grit as she stood defiantly before her stepfather, Judge Walter Ramsey. The year was 1873, and in this unforgiving corner of Arizona territory, his word was law, a fact he never let her forget. "You have disgraced this family for the last time," Judge Ramsey snarled, his knuckles white around his walking cane. The townsfolk who had gathered to witness her humiliation shifted uncomfortably in the merciless afternoon heat. Consorting with that horse thief, helping him escape, did you think I wouldn't discover your betrayal? Harper lifted her chin, her honey-brown hair whipping across her face in the wind. At 22, she had spent 7 years under the judge's cruel guardianship following her mother's death, and his justice had always been swift and without mercy. "Billy Winters was innocent, and you know it," she replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "He stole no horses." The judge's face darkened. "Your defiance only proves my point. Perhaps a night alone with your thoughts will remind you of your place." He turned to the sheriff. "Lock her in the old Blackburn barn until sunrise. No food, no water. Let her contemplate her sins." Rough hands grabbed Harper's arms as the townspeople watched, most averting their eyes. Only Mrs. Peterson had the courage to speak. "Walter, she's not a criminal. Surely there's another way." "Silence," the judge thundered. "My stepdaughter has undermined my authority, and the law itself, the punishment stands." As they dragged Harper away, she caught sight of a stranger watching from the shadows of the general store porch. Tall and broad-shouldered, his face partially hidden beneath a worn Stetson, he observed the scene with an intensity that made her breath catch. Their eyes met briefly before she was pulled around the corner. But in that moment, something passed between them, a silent understanding that lodged in her chest like a promise. The abandoned Blackburn barn stood at the edge of town, its weathered boards groaning in protest as Sheriff Donovan forced Harper inside. The air was thick with dust and the smell of old hay. "I'm sorry, Miss Harper," the aging lawman mumbled, unable to meet her gaze. "Judge's orders." "You know this isn't right, Sheriff," Harper said softly. "Billy was framed. The judge wanted those water rights for himself." The sheriff's weathered face crumpled. "Don't make this harder than it is, girl. I got my own family to think about. The judge, he has ways of making life difficult." With those parting words, he closed the heavy door. The sound of the padlock clicking into place echoing in the empty space. Harper sank down onto a moldy bale of hay, fighting back tears of frustration. Through a crack in the wall, she watched the sun begin its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and red. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped rapidly. Harper wrapped her arms around herself, shivering in her thin calico dress. The distant howl of a coyote only emphasized her isolation. She wasn't afraid of the dark or the creatures that roamed the night. What frightened her was the judge's growing control over her life and the town itself. Since her mother's marriage to Walter Ramsey 6 months before her death, Harper had watched him consolidate power in Copper Creek. What had begun as respected authority had twisted into something tyrannical. Those who opposed him faced foreclosure, false charges, or mysterious accidents. When her childhood friend Billy uncovered evidence of the judge's scheme to steal water rights from local ranchers, he became the latest target. Harper had helped Billy escape, giving him her savings and her mother's locket to sell for travel money. She didn't regret it. even now shivering in this makeshift prison. Hours passed, marked only by the shifting shadows and the occasional rustle of mice in the corners. Harper dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, her throat parched and stomach cramping with hunger. It was nearing midnight, she guessed, when a noise outside caught her attention, the soft crunch of boots on gravel, deliberately placed. Her heart stuttered. Had the judge sent someone to teach her a harsher lesson? She scrambled to her feet, searching frantically for something to use as a weapon, finding only a rusted pitchfork with 2 broken tines. The footsteps stopped outside the barn door. A moment of silence stretched, then a deep voice, quiet but clear. "Miss James, are you in there?" Harper gripped the pitchfork tighter. "Who's asking?" "Name's Vaughn Zachary. I'm not looking to harm you." The stranger from town. Harper moved closer to the door, pitchfork still raised. "What do you want?" "To get you out of there. Stand back from the door." Before Harper could respond, she heard the sound of metal scraping against metal, and then a powerful force hit the door. The ancient wood splintered around the lock, and with a second blow, the door swung open on protesting hinges. Framed in the doorway stood the man she'd seen earlier, his features now visible in the silver moonlight. He was perhaps 30, with a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, eyes as dark as coffee, and a small scar cutting through his right eyebrow. He wore trail-worn clothes, a faded blue shirt, dusty denims, and a leather vest, but carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. He took in Harper's defensive stance and the pitchfork in her hands with a raised eyebrow. "Your prison ends now, Miss James," he said, holstering the pistol he'd used to break the lock, "but we need to move quickly." Harper didn't lower her makeshift weapon. "Why would you help me?" "You don't know me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I know enough. I know injustice when I see it." He glanced over his shoulder. "We can discuss my motivations once we're somewhere safer. The sheriff makes rounds every 2 hours. Harper hesitated, weighing her options. Staying meant facing the judge's escalating punishments. Leaving meant becoming a fugitive, but it also meant freedom. Where would we go? "I have horses waiting. There's an old line shack about 10 miles north in the foothills. We can rest there while we figure out next steps." He held out his hand. "Your choice, Miss James. Stay and face whatever your stepfather has planned, or take a chance on a stranger." Harper looked at his outstretched hand, then back at his face. Something in his steady gaze spoke of reliability, of honor qualities in short supply in Copper Creek these days. She lowered the pitchfork and placed her hand in his. "Lead the way, Mr. Zachary." His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused. "Call me Vaughn." They slipped through the shadows of the sleeping town, keeping to back alleys and darkened paths. Harper's heart pounded in her ears, expecting at any moment to hear shouting or gunfire, but they reached the edge of town without incident, where 2 horses waited, tethered in a small grove of cottonwoods. "Can you ride?" Vaughn asked, untying the reins of a sturdy chestnut mare. Harper gave him a withering look. "I was born on a ranch, Mr. Zachary. I could ride before I could walk." That ghost of a smile appeared again. "Just checking." He handed her the reins. "This is Penny. She's sure-footed and steady." Harper mounted with practiced ease, adjusting her skirts as best she could. Vaughn swung onto his own mount, a powerful black gelding, and with a nod they set off, keeping to the softer ground alongside the road to muffle the sound of hooves. As they rode, Harper studied her mysterious rescuer from the corner of her eye. You still haven't told me why you're doing this. Vaughn's expression hardened in the moonlight. Let's just say your stepfather and I have unfinished business. You're not the first man with a grudge against the judge, Harper said, but you might be the first foolish enough to act on it. Probably, he agreed with a dry chuckle, though I prefer to think of it as determined rather than foolish. They rode in silence for a time. The only sounds the rhythmic breathing of the horses and the occasional call of a night bird. The desert landscape was transformed by moonlight, the saguaros casting long ghostly shadows across the trail. The judge wasn't always like this, Harper found herself saying, or perhaps he was, and my mother just didn't see it. After she died, something changed in him. It was subtle at first, a harsh word here, an unfair judgment there. Then it grew. Vaughn nodded. Power corrupts, some men faster than others. What did he do to you? Harper asked. Vaughn's jaw tightened. That's a story for another time. He pointed ahead. There's the line shack. We'll be safe there until morning. The shack was little more than 4 walls and a roof, abandoned by the cattle company that had once worked this range. Inside was sparse a small iron stove, a rickety table with 1 chair, and a narrow cot pushed against the wall. Vaughn lit a lantern, casting warm yellow light over the dusty interior. It's not much, he said, but it's better than a barn. Harper sank onto the chair, the events of the day finally catching up with her. Why did you really help me, Mr. Zachary? The truth. Please. Vaughn busied himself starting a small fire in the stove. You deserve better than being locked up for an act of conscience. He straightened, meeting her gaze directly. And I knew your mother. Harper stiffened. What? Elizabeth James was a kind woman. She helped my sister when no one else would. His voice softened. I was riding through, heard about her daughter being mistreated. Seemed like the least I could do was return the favor. You knew my mother, Harper repeated, her voice barely a whisper. When? About 8 years ago, I was passing through with my sister, Maggie. She was in trouble. Needed a doctor who wouldn't ask questions. Your mother was the one who found us shelter, got us help. Harper's throat tightened with unshed tears. It sounded exactly like something her mother would have done. Thank you for telling me. Vaughn nodded, then reached into his saddlebag. I have some jerky and hardtack. Not much of a feast, but better than nothing. They ate in companionable silence, Harper suddenly ravenous. After she'd had her fill, she asked, What happens now? Vaughn leaned back against the wall. That depends. The judge won't take your escape lightly. Are you willing to leave Copper Creek? Harper thought of the town that had been her home her entire life, of her mother's grave on the hill overlooking the creek, of the small circle of friends who had stood by her, even as the judge's influence grew. I don't know, she admitted. Running feels like letting him win. Sometimes running is just good strategy, Vaughn said. Live to fight another day. Harper studied him in the lantern light. And what are you fighting for, Mr. Zachary? His dark eyes met hers. Justice. Same as you. There was more to it than that she could see it in the tightness around his mouth, hear it in the careful neutrality of his tone, but she didn't press. They were both entitled to their secrets, at least for now. Get some rest, Vaughn said, nodding toward the cot. I'll keep watch. We can take turns, Harper offered. You need sleep too. He shook his head. I'm used to long nights. Sleep. Tomorrow will be complicated. Harper wanted to argue, but exhaustion pulled at her like quicksand. She lay down on the cot, expecting sleep to claim her immediately. Instead, she found herself watching Vaughn as he sat by the window, his profile outlined by the faint light from the dying embers in the stove. There was something solid about him, something trustworthy that went beyond his connection to her mother. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyelids growing heavy, "for breaking down the door." She thought she saw him smile in the darkness. "Sleep well, Harper." Her name on his lips was the last thing she remembered before drifting into dreams. Dawn arrived with cruel abruptness, sunlight streaming through the cracks in the shack's walls. Harper sat up, disoriented for a moment before the previous day's events came rushing back. Vaughn was gone from his post by the window, but the smell of coffee told her he hadn't gone far. She stepped outside to find him tending a small fire, a dented coffee pot nestled in the coals. The morning air was still cool, the sky a perfect, painful blue. "You're up," he said, pouring a cup of the strong brew and offering it to her. "Sleep well?" "Better than I expected." She accepted the cup gratefully, warming her hands around it. "Any sign of pursuit?" Vaughn shook his head. "Not yet, but they'll be coming. The judge won't let this stand." Harper sipped her coffee, wincing at its bitterness. "We need a plan." "I've been thinking about that." Vaughn settled beside her on a fallen log. "The judge's power comes from fear and the badge he hides behind. Take those away and he's just a man and not a particularly brave one." "Easier said than done," Harper remarked. "People are terrified of him." "With good reason," Vaughn's expression darkened. "But fear can be overcome with the right motivation." "And what motivation would that be?" "The truth." He met her gaze steadily. "About the water rights, about Billy Winters, about your mother's death." Harper's breath caught. "My mother died of fever." Vaughn's silence spoke volumes. "No," Harper whispered, cold spreading through her despite the morning sun. "Are you saying the judge, that he—" "I don't know for certain," Vaughn admitted. "But there are rumors, questions that were never answered. The timing was convenient for him." Harper stood abruptly, her coffee forgotten. "If he hurt her, if he had anything to do with her death, I'll—" Her voice broke. Vaughn rose, placing a steadying hand on her arm. "That's why we need evidence, not just suspicions. We need to build a case that even the territorial governor can't ignore." Harper took a deep, shuddering breath. "Where do we start?" "With Billy Winters. If we can find him, get his testimony about the water rights scheme. It's a beginning." Vaughn hesitated. "There's also a U.S. Marshal in Tucson who's been gathering complaints about the judge, a man named Ellis. He's been trying to build a case for months, but witnesses keep disappearing or changing their stories." Hope flickered in Harper's chest. "Then we're not alone." "No, we're not," Vaughn agreed. "But first we need to get you somewhere safe. The judge will have men watching all the roads." Harper straightened her shoulders. "I'm not hiding while you take all the risks." Vaughn's mouth quirked into that almost smile. "Somehow I figured you'd say that." His expression grew serious. "But you need to understand the danger. The judge won't hesitate to silence you permanently if he thinks you're a threat." "I've been a threat to him since the day I realized what he was," Harper replied. "I'm not afraid." "Maybe you should be," Vaughn said softly. "Fear keeps us cautious." "It also keeps us paralyzed," Harper countered. "I've watched good people suffer under his rule because they were afraid to stand up. I won't be one of them anymore." Vaughn studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. We need supplies, information, and allies. There's a trading post about 15 miles north of here, run by a Navajo man named Thomas Begay. He has no love for the judge, and he hears things. It's a start. They broke camp quickly, erasing all signs of their presence. As they mounted up, Harper asked the question that had been nagging at her since their conversation began. "What's your stake in this, Vaughn?" "The truth this time. It's more than just knowing my mother, isn't it?" Vaughn checked his saddle straps, not meeting her eyes. "The judge sentenced my brother-in-law to hang 3 years ago, claimed he killed a man in a bar fight. It was self-defense, everyone knew it, but the dead man was the judge's cousin." His voice grew tight. "My sister Maggie, the one your mother helped, she died 6 months later. Grief just hollowed her out." Harper's heart ached for him. "I'm sorry. So am I." Vaughn finally looked at her, his eyes haunted. "I've been tracking the judge's movements ever since, looking for a way to bring him down legally. When I heard about you helping Billy escape, I thought maybe you'd be willing to help me." "I am," Harper said without hesitation, "but you should have told me this from the beginning." "Would you have trusted me if I had?" Vaughn asked. Harper considered this. "Maybe not, but I trust you now." Something shifted in his gaze, a softening, a warmth that hadn't been there before. "Then let's go see Bagay. We've got a long ride ahead." They traveled cross-country, avoiding the main trails. Vaughn proved to be an excellent guide, reading the landscape like a book, finding hidden water sources and game trails that kept them concealed from any pursuing eyes. By midday, they stopped in a small canyon to rest the horses and share a meal of jerky and dried apples. "How did you learn to track like this?" Harper asked, stretching her legs. "My father was a scout for the army," Vaughn replied. "He married my mother. She was half Cherokee against her family's wishes. They made a life on the frontier together, taught us kids how to survive in the wilderness." A shadow crossed his face. "Both gone now. Fever took them when I was 17. "So young to be on your own," Harper said softly. "I had Maggie. We looked after each other." He fished a canteen from his saddlebag. "What about your father?" "Never knew him. He was a cavalry officer passing through. My mother said he was kind, handsome, and completely unsuitable as a husband." Harper smiled at the memory. "She never regretted it, though. Said I was worth everything." Vaughn passed her the canteen. She was right. Their eyes met over the rim as she drank, and something fluttered in Harper's chest, a feeling she quickly tamped down. This was neither the time nor the place for such thoughts. They rode on as the afternoon heat intensified, the landscape shifting from desert scrub to pinyon pine as they climbed into higher elevation. By late afternoon, they came upon a small clearing where a sturdy log building stood, smoke curling from its chimney. Several horses were hitched outside, and the sound of voices drifted on the wind. "Bagay's trading post," Vaughn explained, guiding his horse into the trees. "Let's approach carefully. We don't know who might be inside." They left their horses concealed and crept closer on foot. Through a grimy window, they could see 3 men at the counter, cowboys from the look of them, trading for supplies. The man behind the counter was tall and lean, with long black hair tied back neatly, his weathered face impassive as he haggled over the price of ammunition. "That's Bagay," Vaughn whispered. "Let's wait until the others leave." They didn't have to wait long. The cowboys concluded their business and mounted up, riding off in the direction of Copper Creek. Once they were out of sight, Vaughn and Harper approached the trading post, entering to the jingle of a small bell over the door. Thomas Begay looked up, his expression unchanging until he recognized Vaughn. Then a slight smile touched his lips. "Zachary. Been a while." Good to see you, Thomas. Vaughn gestured to Harper. This is Harper James. Begay's dark eyes studied her with interest. Judge Ramsey's stepdaughter. Word is he's offering $50 for information leading to your return. Says you suffered a brain fever and ran off. Harper's temper flared. I'm perfectly sane. Never doubted it, Begay replied mildly. The judge's version of truth has always been flexible. He moved to lock the front door and flip a sign to closed. Come to the back. We can talk freely there. The rear of the trading post served as Begay's living quarters, a simple but comfortable space with a stone fireplace, wooden furniture, and walls lined with books, an unexpected sight that made Harper revise her initial impression of the man. Sit, Begay invited, gesturing to a table. You look like you could use food and real coffee. As he busied himself at the stove, Vaughn explained their situation and their need for information about Billy Winters. Begay set plates of beans, corn cakes, and venison before them. Billy came through here about a week ago, heading for the Colorado Territory. Said something about a cousin in a mining town called Silver Cliff. He glanced at Harper. He had a locket with him, silver, with a small pearl inlay. My mother's, Harper confirmed, throat tightening. I gave it to him to sell for travel money. He didn't sell it, Begay said. Asked me to keep it for you, said you'd come looking eventually. He reached into his shirt and pulled out the locket, passing it to Harper. Said it was too precious to part with. Harper clutched the locket, tears pricking her eyes. The small silver oval held the only picture she had of her mother, a tiny tintype tucked inside. Thank you. Begay nodded, then turned to Vaughn. There's more you should know. Sheriff Donovan resigned this morning. Judge appointed his son-in-law, Frank Morton, as the new sheriff. Mean bastard with a quick trigger finger. Vaughn cursed softly. That complicates things. There's talk in town, too, Begay continued. About your mother, Miss James. One of the judge's former housemaids. Lottie Brown, she's been saying things she shouldn't. Judge had her run out of town 3 days ago, but she's staying with her sister over in Mineral Springs. Harper leaned forward. What kind of things? About the night your mother died. Said she wasn't as sick as the judge claimed, that there was an argument. And later that night when the judge called for the doctor, it was already too late. Begay's expression was grave. She says she kept quiet all these years out of fear, but her conscience won't let her anymore. Harper's hands trembled. We need to speak with her. It's a 2-day ride to Mineral Springs, Vaughn pointed out, and the judge will have men watching all the main roads. Begay stood, moving to a chest in the corner of the room. There's another way. Old Apache trail through the mountains. Dangerous if you don't know it, but I can draw you a map. It'll cut a day off your journey. As Begay sketched the route on a piece of hide, Harper fastened her mother's locket around her neck, feeling its familiar weight like an anchor. If what Lottie says is true, if the judge killed my mother. She couldn't finish the thought. Vaughn's hand covered hers on the table, warm and steadying. One step at a time. We get to Lottie, hear what she knows, then decide our next move. Harper turned her hand to clasp his, drawing strength from his solidity. Thank you for being here. His eyes, when they met hers, held something that made her breath catch a tenderness, a promise. Nowhere else I'd rather be. Begay cleared his throat, breaking the moment. You can stay here tonight, safer than traveling in the dark. I'll keep watch. That night, despite the comfort of a real bed, Begay had insisted Harper take his room while he and Vaughn slept in the storeroom. Harper found sleep elusive. Her mind raced with possibilities, with half-formed plans and terrible suspicions. Had the judge truly murdered her mother? Had she been living with her mother's killer all these years? Unable to rest, she wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and padded quietly to the main room. To her surprise, Vaughn was still awake, sitting by the dying fire, cleaning his revolver by the soft glow of the embers. "Can't sleep?" he asked without looking up. "Too many thoughts," Harper admitted, sinking into a chair opposite him. "Too many questions." Vaughn reassembled his gun with practiced hands. "Questions we'll answer soon enough. What if we don't like the answers?" He holstered the weapon and finally met her gaze. "Then we face them together." There it was again, that word, together. It settled in her chest like a warm stone, both comforting and terrifying. She'd been alone for so long, carrying the weight of her suspicions and fears, that the idea of sharing the burden was almost too much to hope for. "Why did you really come back for me, Vaughn?" she asked, the question slipping out before she could reconsider. The truth. He was quiet for so long that Harper thought he might not answer. Then, softly, "I saw something in you that day in town, standing before the judge, refusing to back down even knowing what it would cost you. Courage like that is rare." He stared into the fire, and it reminded me that some things are worth fighting for. "Justice?" Harper suggested. "Yes." His eyes, when they lifted to hers, held more than just determination. "And the chance for something better, a life not ruled by fear or vengeance." The air between them seemed to thicken, charged with unspoken possibilities. Harper found herself leaning forward slightly, drawn by something she couldn't name. The moment shattered at the sound of hoofbeats outside, several riders, approaching fast. Vaughn was on his feet instantly, gun drawn. Begay appeared from the storeroom, rifle in hand. "Back door," he said tersely. "Now." They slipped out into the night as the front door of the trading post burst open. Through the window, Harper caught a glimpse of men in dusters, led by a tall figure with a gleaming sheriff's badge. Frank Morton, she presumed. "Where's your horse?" Vaughn whispered as they crept toward the trees. "Still saddled in the lean-to," Harper replied, heart hammering. They reached the horses just as shouts erupted from inside the trading post. Harper could hear Begay's deep voice, calm but firm, denying any knowledge of their whereabouts. "He'll be all right," Vaughn assured her as they mounted. "They can't prove he helped us." They rode hard through the darkness, following a barely visible trail that wound upward into the mountains. Behind them, a gunshot echoed, then another. "Thomas!" Harper gasped, reining in. Vaughn caught her bridle. "We can't go back. Not now. Best way to honor his help is to finish what we started." Tears stung Harper's eyes as they continued their ascent, the trail growing steeper and more treacherous. She prayed that Thomas Begay was alive, that the shots had been warnings or misfires. The alternative was too painful to contemplate, another life destroyed by the judge's cruelty. They rode through the night, following the crude map Begay had drawn, navigating by moonlight and Vaughn's uncanny sense of direction. By dawn, they had climbed high into the mountains, the air noticeably cooler, the vegetation changing to tall pines and aspen groves. "We'll rest here," Vaughn decided, guiding them to a small clearing beside a stream. "The horses need water, and we need to eat." Harper dismounted stiffly, her muscles protesting the long hours in the saddle. She led Penny to the stream, stroking the mare's neck as she drank. "Good girl," she murmured. Just a little further. Vaughn joined her, leading his black gelding. "You're a natural with horses," he observed. "They're better company than most people," Harper replied with a tired smile. More honest, at least. Can't argue with that. Vaughn squatted down to splash water on his face. We should reach Mineral Springs by nightfall if we keep a steady pace. Harper nodded, then froze as a sound reached her ears, distant but unmistakable. Horses coming up the trail behind them. Vaughn was already moving, gathering their meager supplies. They're tracking us, must have forced Begay to reveal the trail. They remounted quickly, pushing deeper into the mountains, following the meandering stream upward. The terrain grew increasingly difficult, narrow passages between towering rock formations, steep inclines that forced them to dismount and lead the horses, dense stands of pine that scratched at their faces and clothing. By midday, they had gained significant elevation, and Harper's ears popped painfully as they emerged onto a high ridge. Below them stretched a panoramic view of the territory, rolling foothills giving way to desert, and in the far distance, the hazy outline of what might be Mineral Springs. "Look," Vaughn said, pointing to a thin line of dust rising from the trail below. 4 riders, maybe 5, moving fast. Harper squinted against the sun. "How are they tracking us so easily?" "Professional tracker, probably," Vaughn replied grimly. "The judge has money to hire the best." They continued along the ridge, then began the descent down the other side, following a treacherous switchback trail that had Harper's heart in her throat. One misstep would send horse and rider plummeting hundreds of feet to the rocks below. The pursuers would face the same hazard, she consoled herself, which might slow them down. Late afternoon found them in a narrow canyon, the walls rising steeply on either side. The stream they'd been following had become a proper creek, gurgling merrily over smooth stones, seemingly oblivious to their desperate flight. "We need to rest the horses," Harper said, noting how Penny's sides were heaving. "They can't keep this pace much longer." Vaughn nodded reluctantly. "There's a wider spot ahead. We'll stop there briefly." The wider spot was a small clearing where the canyon broadened slightly, offering enough room for the horses to graze on the sparse grass while Harper and Vaughn shared the last of their jerky. "We still have a few hours of daylight," Vaughn said, studying the position of the sun. "If we push hard, we can reach Mineral Springs before dark." Harper nodded, too exhausted for words. The emotional and physical toll of the past 2 days was catching up with her, leaving her light-headed and weak. She closed her eyes briefly, allowing herself a moment of rest. A sharp crack echoed through the canyon, a rifle shot, followed immediately by the whine of a bullet ricocheting off stone nearby. Harper and Vaughn dove for cover behind a fallen log as 2 more shots rang out. "They've caught up," Vaughn growled, drawing his revolver. "Stay down." "The horses!" Harper gasped, seeing Penny rear in fright. "Let them run," Vaughn said. "They'll head downhill toward water. We can find them later if we survive this." Sure enough, both horses bolted down the canyon, disappearing around a bend. Harper peered cautiously over the log, trying to locate their attackers. She spotted movement on the canyon rim above 2 men with rifles, using the height to their advantage. "Up there," she whispered, pointing. Vaughn cursed softly. "They've got us pinned. We need to move before the others reach us from behind." As if on cue, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed up the canyon. Their pursuers had split up, some taking the high ground, while others followed their trail directly. "This way," Vaughn said, grabbing Harper's hand and pulling her toward a narrow crevice in the canyon wall. "It might lead somewhere." The crevice was barely wide enough for them to squeeze through sideways, the rough stones scraping their arms and tearing at their clothing. It opened into a small cavern, damp and cool, with a shaft of sunlight streaming down from a hole in the ceiling far above. "Dead end," Harper whispered, despair washing over her. "Maybe not." Vaughn examined the walls carefully. "Look, there another opening." The second passage was even narrower than the first, forcing them to remove their gun belts and push them ahead as they inched forward in near darkness. Harper fought against rising claustrophobia, focusing on Vaughn's steady presence ahead of her. After what seemed like an eternity, the passage widened slightly, and Harper could feel a faint breeze on her face. "Air," she gasped. "There's a way out." They emerged onto a narrow ledge halfway up the canyon wall, concealed from below by a stand of juniper trees. Below them, they could see their pursuers, 3 men on horseback, led by Sheriff Morton himself, searching the area where they had disappeared. "They'll find the crevice soon enough," Vaughn murmured. "We need to keep moving." The ledge extended along the canyon wall, gradually sloping downward until, nearly half a mile later, it connected with the main trail. By then, the sounds of their pursuers had faded, though Harper had no illusions that they had given up the chase. "What now?" she asked as they paused to catch their breath. "Without horses, we'll never reach Mineral Springs by nightfall." Vaughn scanned their surroundings. "There's a homestead in that valley," he said, pointing to a distant column of smoke. "Maybe 2 miles. We could ask for help." It was their only option. They set off across the rugged terrain, keeping to the tree line where possible for concealment. The sun was low on the horizon by the time they approached the homestead, a modest cabin with a barn and corral, a small garden plot, and a few chickens scratching in the yard. An older woman looked up from her washing as they approached, her weathered face creasing with concern at their disheveled appearance. "Lord above, you two look like you've been through the wars," she exclaimed, drying her hands on her apron. "Martha Wilkins, this is my place." "Vaughn Zachary, and this is Harper James," Vaughn replied. "We're in some trouble, madam, men chasing us. We lost our horses and need help getting to Mineral Springs." Martha's eyes narrowed. "James? Any relation to Elizabeth James that married Judge Ramsey?" Harper's heart skipped. "She was my mother." Martha studied her face, then nodded slowly. "I see the resemblance. She was a fine woman, your mother. Too good for that snake she married." She gestured toward the cabin. "Come inside. We'll sort this out." Over a simple but hearty meal of beans, cornbread, and coffee, they explained their situation. Martha listened without interruption, her expression growing darker as the tale unfolded. "Doesn't surprise me one bit," she said when they finished. "That man's been poisoning these parts for years. My Harold God rest him, he stood against the judge when he tried to claim water rights to our creek. Next thing we knew, Harold was facing cattle rustling charges." Her mouth set in a grim line. "Died in that territorial prison 3 years ago. Pneumonia, they said." Harper reached across the table to grasp the older woman's hand. "I'm so sorry." Martha squeezed back briefly, then straightened her shoulders. "No use dwelling on it now. Question is, what are you planning to do once you find this Lottie person?" "Get her testimony, along with Billy's, to U.S. Marshal Ellis in Tucson," Vaughn explained. "Build a case strong enough that even the judge's connections can't make it disappear." Martha nodded thoughtfully. "My work, but you'll never make it to Mineral Springs tonight, and those men will be combing these hills come morning." "We don't want to bring trouble to your door," Harper said. Martha snorted. "Trouble's been at my door since the day I stood by my husband against the judge. One more helping won't make a difference." She rose from the table. "You can take Harold's horse. He's old but steady, and there's a shortcut to Mineral Springs through Tyler's Pass." I'll draw you a map." That night, Harper slept fitfully on a pallet in Martha's small parlor, haunted by dreams of her mother's face, pale and accusing. She woke before dawn, a plan forming in her mind. Vaughn was already up helping Martha with morning chores. His face was shadowed with stubble, his eyes tired but alert. He looked up as Harper approached, and something in his expression made her breath catch concern, yes, but also a warmth that had nothing to do with the morning sun. "I've been thinking," Harper said without preamble. "We're making this too complicated." Vaughn raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "We're running, hiding, hoping to gather enough evidence to bring the judge down legally. But he's always one step ahead because he controls everything, the law, the town, the narrative." Harper took a deep breath. "What if, instead of running from him, we bring him to us, on our terms, not his?" "What are you suggesting?" Vaughn asked cautiously. "A trap. We send word that I'm willing to return to Copper Creek to apologize publicly for my misunderstanding about Billy Winters. The judge's pride will make him accept he'll want the town to see me humbled." Harper's eyes gleamed with determination. "But when I speak, it won't be to apologize. It will be to accuse him publicly of my mother's murder, with Lottie Brown standing ready to confirm my words." "That's extremely dangerous," Vaughn protested. "He could have you shot before you say a word." "Not if Marshal Ellis is there too with a territorial warrant ready," Harper countered. "Not if the whole town is watching." Martha, who had been listening silently, nodded slowly. "It might work. The judge values his reputation above all. A public confrontation would force his hand." Vaughn paced the small kitchen, clearly troubled. "And if it goes wrong?" "If he decides to silence you permanently?" "Then at least I'll have tried," Harper said softly. "I can't keep running forever, Vaughn. This ends now, one way or another." He stopped pacing, his eyes meeting hers. In them she saw fear, admiration, and something deeper that made her heart race. "You're the bravest person I've ever met, Harper James," he said quietly, "and the most foolhardy." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "But if this is what you want, I'll stand with you." Martha cleared her throat. "My nephew works for the telegraph office in Mineral Springs. He can get messages to both the marshal and the judge without raising suspicion. And I know folks in Copper Creek who would ensure the whole town turns out for such an event." The plan took shape over breakfast. Harper would send word to the judge offering her surrender and public apology in 3 days' time. Enough time for them to reach Mineral Springs, find Lottie Brown, and contact Marshal Ellis. The confrontation would take place in the town square, where the judge often held court for minor offenses, ensuring maximum visibility. They set out for Mineral Springs an hour later, Martha's aging gelding carrying them both at a steady if unspectacular pace. The shortcut through Tyler's Pass proved to be a narrow, treacherous trail that wound through a series of box canyons, but it kept them well away from the main roads where the judge's men would be watching. By late afternoon, they caught sight of Mineral Springs, a bustling settlement larger than Copper Creek, built around the natural hot springs that gave the town its name, and attracted visitors seeking cures for various ailments. They approached cautiously, aware that word of their flight might have reached here as well. Martha had given them the address of her sister, who owned a small boarding house on the edge of town. It was there, she assured them, that they would find Lottie Brown, who had taken refuge after fleeing Copper Creek. The boarding house was a tidy two-story structure with a wide porch and flower boxes in the windows. A sign proclaiming Turner's Lodging, clean rooms, good food, swung gently in the afternoon breeze. Harper and Vaughn tethered their borrowed horse to a hitching post and approached the front door, both acutely aware of their disheveled appearance after days on the trail. The door opened before they could knock, revealing a stout woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun. Her stern expression softened as she took in their trail-worn state. "You must be Martha's friends," she said. "I'm Harriet Turner. Come in quickly before you're seen." Inside, the boarding house was clean and simply furnished, smelling of beeswax and fresh baking. Harriet led them to a small parlor at the rear of the house, where a thin, nervous-looking woman sat by the window, her hands constantly in motion, twisting a handkerchief. "Lottie," Harriet said gently, "these are the people Martha told us about. Harper James, Elizabeth's daughter." Lottie Brown looked up, her pale blue eyes widening. "Oh, my stars," she whispered. "You have her look about you, especially around the eyes." Harper stepped forward, her heart hammering. "Mrs. Brown, I need to know the truth about my mother's death." Lottie's hands trembled more violently. "I should have spoken up years ago. The guilt of it has eaten at me like a cancer." She gestured for Harper to sit beside her. "Your mother wasn't ill. Not the way the judge claimed. Oh, she'd been feeling poorly, but it wasn't serious. That night, I heard them arguing, terrible shouting from the judge's study. Something about papers she wouldn't sign. Property, she insisted, belonged to you when you came of age." Harper frowned. "What property?" "The mining claim, I think. Your real father left it to your mother, and she meant it for you. Valuable land up in the Catalinas." Lottie swallowed hard. "The judge wanted it in his name. Your mother refused. I heard glass breaking, then silence. When I went to check, the judge ordered me away. An hour later, he was calling for the doctor, saying she'd collapsed with fever." Tears filled Lottie's eyes. "But I saw her, Miss Harper. There was a bruise forming on her temple and blood on her collar." Harper felt as if the floor had dropped away beneath her. All these years she had suspected the judge of cruelty and corruption, but not the murder of her own mother. "You saw this and said nothing?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Lottie hung her head. "I was a widow with 3 small children and nowhere else to go." "The judge made it clear what would happen if I spoke out." Her thin shoulders slumped. "I've lived with the shame of my silence ever since." Vaughn, who had been standing quietly by the door, finally spoke. "Would you testify to this before a judge? A real one from the territorial court?" Lottie straightened, a flicker of courage animating her tired face. "Yes. It's time the truth was told, whatever it costs me." Harper reached out to clasp the older woman's hands. "Thank you. Your testimony could finally bring him to justice." They spent the evening refining their plan. Harriet's son, the telegraph operator, sent messages to both Marshal Ellis and Judge Ramsey. To the judge, a carefully worded surrender from Harper, offering a public apology in the Copper Creek town square in 3 days' time. To Marshal Ellis, a more detailed communication explaining their plan and the evidence they had gathered. That night, lying in a real bed for the first time in days, Harper found herself unable to sleep despite her exhaustion. The revelation of her mother's murder had reopened wounds she thought long healed, bringing with it a fresh wave of grief and rage. But mixed with these darker emotions was a strange sense of purpose, of clarity. For 7 years, she had lived under the judge's roof, watching his corruption spread like a stain across the community she loved. Now, finally, she had the means to stop him. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She rose, wrapping a borrowed shawl around her nightgown, and opened the door to find Vaughn standing in the hallway, looking as sleepless as she felt. "I saw the light under your door," he said quietly. "Thought you might want company." Harper stepped aside to let him enter. Suddenly aware of the impropriety of the situation, a man in her bedroom in the middle of the night, and equally certain that she didn't care. Conventional proprieties seemed trivial compared to the trials they had faced together. Vaughn remained standing just inside the door, his posture respectful despite the intimacy of the setting. "Are you sure about this plan?" he asked without preamble. "It's not too late to change your mind, to find another way." Harper sat on the edge of the bed, tucking her feet beneath her. "I'm sure. It feels right." Confronting him directly after all these years of silent fear. "I admire your courage," Vaughn said, his voice soft. "But I worry about the risk." "Why?" The question slipped out before she could reconsider. "Why does it matter so much to you, Vaughn? This started as your search for justice for your sister, but it feels like something more now." He was quiet for a long moment, his face half shadowed in the lamplight. "Because somewhere between breaking down that barn door and now, you became more than just an ally in this fight." He met her gaze directly. "You became someone I can't bear the thought of losing." The simple honesty of his words took Harper's breath away. She had been so focused on survival, on justice, that she had pushed aside the growing attraction between them. Now, with his feelings laid bare, she could no longer ignore her own. "I feel the same," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper, "and it terrifies me. I've lost everyone I've ever loved to the judge's cruelty." Vaughn crossed the room slowly, kneeling before her so their eyes were level. "Then let's end his power over you, over us, once and for all. Together." "Together," Harper agreed, reaching out to touch his face, feeling the rough stubble beneath her fingers. "Whatever happens in Copper Creek, I'm glad I found you, Vaughn Zachary." He turned his head slightly, pressing a gentle kiss to her palm. "Get some rest, Harper. We have a long journey ahead." With that, he rose and left the room, closing the door softly behind him. Harper lay back on the bed, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it, and finally drifted into a dreamless sleep. The next 2 days passed in a flurry of preparation. Marshal Ellis sent word that he would meet them outside Copper Creek on the appointed day, bringing 2 deputies and official papers for the judge's arrest. Lottie practiced her testimony with growing resolve, drawing strength from Harper's determination. And from Martha's sister, they received word that the entire town was buzzing with news of Harper's return and planned public apology. On the morning of the 3rd day, they set out for Copper Creek. Harper, Vaughn, Lottie, and Marshal Ellis, who had arrived in Mineral Springs the previous evening. The marshal was a lean, weathered man with shrewd eyes and a quiet competence that inspired confidence. He had been building a case against the judge for months, he explained, but witnesses kept disappearing or recanting their testimonies. "Your plan is risky," he told Harper as they rode, "but it might be the only way to break his hold on the town. Public accusations are hard to silence or deny." They reached the outskirts of Copper Creek by mid-morning, pausing on a ridge overlooking the town. From this distance it looked peaceful, ordinary false advertising for the corruption that festered at its heart. Harper could see a crowd gathering in the town square, just as she had hoped. The judge would want witnesses to her humiliation. "Ready?" Vaughn asked, reining his horse alongside hers. Harper nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Ready?" They rode down the main street at a measured pace, drawing curious stares from townspeople who recognized Harper. Whispers followed in their wake, growing into a murmur as they approached the square where a substantial crowd had gathered around a raised platform. Judge Ramsey stood there, resplendent in his formal black coat, his silver beard neatly trimmed, the very picture of dignified authority. His expression as he spotted Harper was one of smug satisfaction, quickly masked by a show of paternal concern. "My dear stepdaughter," he called loudly enough for the crowd to hear. "I'm relieved to see you well. Your episode had us all quite concerned." Harper dismounted, handing her reins to Vaughn. She approached the platform alone, conscious of every eye upon her, of the weight of her mother's locket against her chest, of Vaughn's supportive presence behind her. "Judge Ramsey," she replied, her voice clear and carrying. "I've come as promised to address the people of Copper Creek." He gestured magnanimously toward the platform. "By all means, they're eager to hear your apology." Harper climbed the steps, feeling a curious calm settle over her. This moment had been 7 years in the making. She turned to face the crowd, recognizing familiar faces, Mrs. Peterson, who had tried to intervene when she was sentenced to the barn. Sheriff Donovan, looking uncomfortable at the edge of the gathering. Thomas B. Gay, sporting a bandage on his arm but very much alive, his eyes conveying silent support. "People of Copper Creek," Harper began, her voice stronger than she'd expected. "I stand before you today not to apologize, but to accuse." A murmur rippled through the crowd. The judge stepped forward, his face darkening. "Now see here. I accuse Walter Ramsey of the murder of my mother, Elizabeth James," Harper continued, speaking over him. "I accuse him of corruption, of stealing water rights from ranchers through false claims, of sentencing innocent men to prison or worse to further his own interests." The judge's face contorted with rage. "This is the raving of a disturbed mind. Sheriff Morton, remove her at once." But before Morton could move, Marshal Ellis stepped forward, badge glinting in the sunlight. "Judge Walter Ramsey, I have a warrant for your arrest on charges of corruption, abuse of authority, and suspected murder. You'll be coming with me to Tucson to stand trial." Chaos erupted in the square. Some townsfolk shouted in protest, others in support. The judge, his face now ashen, backed away toward the edge of the platform. "This is absurd. I've served this community faithfully for years. These accusations are without merit." "Tell them, Lottie," Harper called, gesturing to where the former housekeeper stood, trembling but resolute. "Tell them what you saw the night my mother died." Lottie stepped forward, her thin voice somehow cutting through the din. "I saw him strike her during an argument. Later he called for the doctor, claiming fever, but there was blood on her clothing and a bruise on her temple." The judge's composure cracked entirely. "You lying witch!" he snarled, reaching inside his coat and producing a small derringer. Before anyone could react, he leveled it at Harper. "You're just like your mother, stubborn, self-righteous, and too stupid to know when to keep quiet." Several things happened at once. Vaughn shouted a warning and lunged toward the platform. Marshal Ellis drew his weapon, and Judge Ramsey fired, the sound deafening in the confined space of the town square. Harper felt something burn across her upper arm. Then Vaughn was there, tackling her to the platform floor as a second shot rang out. When she looked up, Marshal Ellis stood over the judge, who lay clutching his shoulder, his face contorted in pain and fury. "It's over, Ramsey," the marshal said quietly. "Your reign in Copper Creek is finished." In the days that followed, the truth emerged like spring flowers after a long winter, tentative at first, then in a rush of color and life. With the judge in custody and the marshal's protection, witnesses came forward one by one. Ranchers spoke of threats and falsified deeds. Shopkeepers admitted to paying protection money. Even Sheriff Donovan finally found his courage, testifying about trials fixed and evidence planted. Billy Winters returned from Colorado, bringing documentation that proved the judge's water rights scheme. And from the judge's own study came the final piece of evidence, a deed to a valuable mining claim in the Catalina Mountains. Elizabeth James's signature clearly forged, dated 2 days after her death. A week after the confrontation in the town square, Harper stood in the cemetery on the hill overlooking Copper Creek, fresh flowers in her hands for her mother's grave. The wound on her arm was healing well, a shallow graze that would leave only the faintest scar. Other wounds, deeper and older, were healing too. She heard footsteps behind her and knew without turning that it was Vaughn. He had been a constant presence these past days, handling the practicalities while she dealt with the emotional aftermath of confronting her stepfather and her past. "The marshal just left for Tucson with the judge," he said, coming to stand beside her. "The territorial court has set the trial for next month." Harper nodded, placing the flowers gently on the grave. "And Copper Creek? What happens now?" "The town council has appointed Sheriff Donovan temporarily. There's talk of proper elections in the spring." Vaughn's hand found hers, fingers intertwining naturally, comfortably. "The people here are resilient. They'll rebuild, create something better." Harper turned to face him, studying the features that had become so dear to her in such a short time, the strong line of his jaw, the warmth in his dark eyes, the small scar through his eyebrow that she now knew came from a childhood fall from a tree. "And what about you? What happens now for Vaughn Zachary?" His expression softened, a real smile replacing the ghost she'd first seen when he broke down the barn door. "That depends entirely on what happens for Harper James." Harper felt a smile tugging at her own lips. "I thought I might stay in Copper Creek. There's work to be done here, healing to facilitate. And I have my mother's house back now, thanks to the marshal's investigation." "It's a good plan," Vaughn agreed, his thumb tracing gentle circles on the back of her hand. "Room in that plan for a partner, perhaps?" Harper stepped closer, close enough to feel the warmth of him, to see the flecks of ember in his brown eyes. "I think that could be arranged. On one condition." "Name it," he said softly. "That you kiss me properly, right now, under this big open sky. I've been waiting since that night in Mineral Springs." Vaughn's laugh was low and warm as he pulled her into his arms. "Happy to oblige, Miss James," he murmured before his lips met hers in a kiss that felt like coming home, like freedom, like the beginning of something extraordinary. Above them, the desert sky stretched endlessly blue, witnessing the moment when a prison truly ended and a new life began.